Sophia, a medical student nearing graduation, is taking a scientific writing course. After a few weeks of lessons, she realizes that she has a multitude of notes, guidelines, and editorial formats at her disposal. However, she struggles to find a structured method to synthesize and organize all this material before moving on to in-depth study. At the end of a course, a lesson, or even a journey of exploration into a topic that interests us, we might experience the same feeling of being somewhat overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information we think we have grasped. We cannot yet say that we have truly learned something. In fact, reading or listening does not necessarily mean learning. What happens while listening to a lesson is the so-called shallow processing, studied by Craik and Lockhart as part of their levels of processing theory. This theory focuses on how the level of information processing affects its comprehension and memorization. Craik and Lockhart introduced the concept of shallow processing to describe the learning phase that focuses only on the immediate and superficial characteristics of information, such as form and sound, without delving too deeply into its meaning. To move to deep processing, which involves meaningful analysis, a different type of effort is required. This often begins with transcribing or reorganizing notes, integrating them with information gathered from textbooks or handouts, and preparing diagrams or summaries. This is the process of reworking content that we have all engaged in at some point during our education, either alone or in collaboration with classmates. This reworking activity represents an initial moment of deeper reflection and a first step toward greater understanding of the content. And it is important to understand how we can use our LLM to assist us without compromising our learning process. Specifically, the cognitive benefits that come from directly reworking content. Let's observe how Sophia proceeds and try to understand which strategies might be useful to adopt at this stage. Sophia only has a notebook with handwritten notes taken during the lesson. She feels that the content is somewhat limited. She has never been very good at taking notes. Moreover, during this period, her attention has been completely absorbed by the main courses. First, she asks her LLM for help in enriching her initial content base and receives a series of interesting recommendations, including manuals, videos, articles. After exploring them, she selects the ones she considers most reliable, a handout and a video, which together with her notes will form the starting base. She uploads her notes, the handout, and the video to her LLM. And she asks, "Can you help me transform my material into a single schematic document that will help me organize everything and memorize it?" Looking at the output received, she thinks it might be easier to use if it were in table form. However, the table is a bit too concise. She tries again and requests a greater zoom, delving more and more into the specifics. "Can you create a table with only the contents of the second section regarding the scientific article?" "Can you create a new table with only the structure of the article?" Here it is. Now, by comparing the table with the content of the handout and her notes, she finds the right level of synthesis to support her study. Through an iterative process, Sophia has carefully identified the right level of synthesis to enhance memorization and understanding. She must strive to find an appropriate level that allows her to reduce cognitive load and maximize learning efficiency, avoiding both an overload of information and excessive simplification, as both can hinder the construction of meaningful knowledge. Finally, knowing her preference for visualizing concepts in the form of a map, she asks her LLM to organize the table into a cognitive map. In constructing these synthesis tools, the temptation might be to look for a magical summary that provides all the answers in just a few lines. But the truth is that relying solely on summaries is never a good idea. Let me explain why. When we reduce everything to just a few lines, we risk losing the core of the issue, the connections, the details, the reasons behind the concepts. It's a bit like using an overly simplified map for a treasure hunt. Sure, you might know where to go, but you miss out on all the landscapes, shortcuts, and maybe even the treasure itself. Diagrams, tables, and summaries are great tools for building a basic structure, but they truly work only if they remain dynamic, flexible, and most importantly, enriched along the way. Jean Piaget, the great learning theorist, teaches us that knowledge is not something that simply arrives from the outside, like a package delivered by a courier. Piaget tells us that every time we learn something, our brain must carry out an important process of assimilation and accommodation, integrating new information with what already exists. This process, however, is neither linear nor immediate. It requires time, reflection, and deepening. Going back to compare the summaries created, perhaps with the help of an LLM, summaries, tables, or maps, with the sources means reopening that dialogue with knowledge, reevaluating one's intuitions, and grasping those details that may have initially escaped you. It is only through this return to more structured sources that we can truly enrich our understanding, avoiding the risk of flattening it into a synthetic but reduced and sterile version. Diagrams are like scaffolding. They serve as a tool for working. But in the end, the building, your knowledge, must be larger and richer. Returning to the sources, rereading, delving deeper, this allows you to restructure and strengthen that building. Sophia could also ask her LLM for additional help. Can you create a glossary with the definitions of the most important words? When studying a new topic, one of the most important things is to truly understand the key terms. Think of these terms as the foundation of a house. If they are solid, everything you build on top will be stable and easy to understand. Defining concepts in a simple and clear way, perhaps with some practical examples or by linking them to something you already know, helps you not only remember them better, but also use them correctly when studying or doing exercises. It's like building a specific vocabulary that you need to speak that subject. In addition to diagrams, summaries, and maps, you can ask your LLM to prepare a glossary of the most important specific terms from the texts you are working on. Finally, Sophia decides to ask her LLM to help her analyze the texts with a clear objective, providing her with a list of guiding questions. This is a very interesting strategy. You can ask your LLM to create a list of guiding questions based on the topic of the text you are about to read. This is useful because an LLM can formulate questions that might not come to mind, covering different levels of understanding, from basic concepts to more complex insights. Guiding questions work like a compass. They orient you as you explore a topic, preventing you from getting lost in the details and also encouraging you to think actively. They help you identify the main ideas of the text, connect new concepts to what you already know, and better understand the more complex steps. By asking yourself targeted questions about them, what we have seen are useful insights for leveraging artificial intelligence and expanding the variety of study tools at our disposal. In the important phase of our learning that involves reworking content, typically following an initial exploration through attending a lesson, watching a video, or reading a book, but without forgetting the importance of reflecting and reprocessing things in our own way. Of course, we also take into account that we can proceed as well. On the contrary, we can create our own summary outlines and then ask the LLM to review, refine, or systematize them. The important thing is that regardless of the approach we follow, our goal should always be to maintain control over the learning process, leaving AI a role of support and integration.